Morning all. I was checking out the second candidates tournament in 1962 which Fischer qualified for, and there was some very interesting games in that tournament. In particular, the game Petrosian against Viktor Korchnoi caught my eye. So this candidates tournament in 1962 was played in Curacao, which is an island in the southern Caribbean Sea off the Venezuelan coast. The country of Curacao is a constituent country of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. It has a population of over 140,000, and its capital is Willemstad. Apparently, this tournament was played with very high temperatures and very high humidity, almost 100% humidity. So a very tiring tournament indeed, because like the 1959 tournament, each player had to play each other 4 times. So let's have a look at this game with Petrosian playing white against Viktor Korchnoi in round 23. C4, and Viktor Korchnoi replied C5, so a symmetrical English, knight F3, knight F6, and then we see an early D4. Korchnoi takes, knight takes D4, and he plays G6. So far, so good. Doesn't look like anything special. Knight C3, and yeah, I just want to check a few things out. Viktor's next move is actually D5, which looks fairly logical. It looks like a Grunfeld kind of type move where white might be tempted for CD perhaps, but white wasn't. White is playing very dynamically now, allowing his C4 pawn to drop if needed. He plays actually bishop G5, and Viktor Korchnoi actually does take on C4. So taking on C4 is not sort of taking care of his development, but black does have a threat here after bishop G5 with this D5. Maybe D5 is a little bit committal. If bishop G7, perhaps white can just take on F6 and then just take on D5 here. So already there's a bit of a question here. If black started with A, he has to follow with B and then C. So D5, and now after bishop G5 he's prompted to play D takes C. What else? On live book here there is a move which is more popular, knight E4 in this position. White can play take here, knight B5, and this kind of continuation I can carry on like this. So anyway, in the game we see D takes C4, which might be a little bit inferior actually to knight E4. Maybe knight E4 was the best idea in this position, but D takes C4, and now just E3, very simple move to try and get the pawn back with the bishop, accelerate development. And here perhaps black should be playing bishop G7 and carrying on with development, trying to castle, that sort of thing. But instead perhaps the heat was getting to Viktor Korchnoi, and there's some empathy I have for that, because at the moment in the UK it's pretty hot. We have a heat wave here. So this next move doesn't seem that cautious, shall we say. Queen A5. What it does do is attack this bishop, and asking white, does he really want to give up the bishop for the knight on F6? Would there really be justification to do that here? Wouldn't white be weaker on the dark squares later? Well, in fact, Tigran did take on F6. E takes F6. Okay, so he's doubled the pawns as well, and he's got an accelerated development after bishop takes C4. And here, a routine move like bishop G7. Let's see, if bishop G7 had been played, then bishop B5 is a bit dangerous here. All of a sudden, if bishop D7, queen F3, there's targets to have to deal with. Maybe white can end up with a bit of an advantage like this. But okay, maybe bishop g7 is plausible, as well as bishop e7. But in the game we see curiously bishop b4, and these look like very strange moves, queen a5 and then bishop b4. But can Tigran exploit them? If he simply castles here, black can do something quite cheeky, I believe. He can just take here, and not with the idea of winning a pawn, but just to dampen white's control of d5 and avoid the knight d5s, and just castle here. And actually white's advantage is minimal here. But Tigran does take the time to play after bishop b4, rook c1. And another strangely provocative move though is played here, a6, again not developing, not casting the king into safety. Here white castles, and now, I mean, is it actually possible still to just castle here? Why has black been faffing around not castling? Well, now knight d5 looks as though this is quite dangerous. With a few threats like knight b3, this bishop's loose, and it's unclear where the bishop can actually go. If it goes to d6, there's also knight takes f6 now, and things start to get horrible. Okay, so basically knight d7 again, not casting. Is this like a record amount of times that Viktor hasn't castled in an English opening as black here? So Tigran questions the bishop on b4 with a3, and perhaps best is just taking on c3, but another move which keeps the king still in the centre, bishop e7. And now a dynamic move from Tigran, b4, offering the a3 pawn. If that's taken, knight d5, the king's now stranded in the centre, and not only that, rook a1 is threatened with rook a2 to trap the queen. For example, bishop d8, rook a1, queen b2, rook a2 traps the queen. So this is a bit of a painful move to meet. And where can the queen actually go? It doesn't want to go as b6 to invite knight d5 with tempo, or c7. d8 looks pretty miserable. Let's have a quick look at d8. Well, actually, okay. There is something about d8, but we might as well look at the game continuation. Queen e5 was played in the game, and now another dynamic move in this position. f4, gaining another tempo, pushing the queen back, offering e3. If e3 is taken here, this is another poison pawn. The king would just step to h1 with the threat of rook e1 taking on e7 now. What could black do here? This is getting quite troublesome. If knight b6, rook f3, and the queen's actually in trouble as well here. White ends up winning material because of that. So, okay, so this is looking pretty dangerous, not just from the point of view of rook e1, but also rook f3 to trap the queen. So that pawn can't be taken. The queen goes all the way back. So does all this provocation for Viktor Korchnoi, which seems absolutely excessive, lead to anything concrete in this position? Well, Tigran plays a move which does seem as though it has potential to punish black for the audacity shown in this game. Can you spot it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay, Petrosian plays bishop takes f7 check. So king takes f7, queen b3 check now is the idea. So what's the point of this? Well, one point, let's have a look. King g7, there's knight e6 check, and the king is uncomfortably placed here. If it wants to stay on this diagonal, knight g5 check, double check, would bring the queen closer to exterminate the king, and this would be a very unpleasant position. Knight e6, now threatens g4, weaving a mating net because of that queen g7 threat. The king's safety is untenable here. So the king doesn't want to provoke knight e6 check, particularly after king g7. This knight e6 looks fairly convincing. Just to convince you further, if king h6, rook f3, and there's the extermination on the cards. So the king actually, after this check, wisely perhaps goes to e8, wisely in the circumstances. And now there's no infiltration with knight e6. Knight e6 might be a good move though, but an even stronger move it seems. This next move, knight d5, creates a lot more concrete threats like knight c7 check. It's knight c7 which is parried in particular now with Viktor Korchnoi next move, bishop d6. And now we see knight e6, and again renews the threat actually of knight c7 check. Viktor Korchnoi has found himself helpless here, an embarrassing position for him to be in with the black pieces. His pieces on the queen side do not inspire confidence. His earlier moves in the game, for me, looks like one of his worst games ever. Okay, b5 was played, but the concrete punishment, how will it go from here? White plays knight dc7 check. The king hasn't got many squares here, doesn't want to go on that diagonal for that knight g5 reason, goes to e7. And now the knight on e6 goes back to threaten knight c6 forking queen and king here. This knight c6 threat is very, very dangerous. So bishop takes c7, for example, knight c6 check, just winning the queen, is clear enough. So this looks pretty dire. The king now goes to f8, and now simply white just takes the rook on a8, and this looks fairly diabolical for black. He resigns here. If queen takes a8, queen e6, numerous threats. If we move the bishop back, well, then c8 would be lost. If we move it back here, then rook takes c8. Where can the bishop go back? If bishop e7, knight c6. So how does black defend e7 here? This queen is not helping matters. So it's totally gone, this position here after queen e6. So after knight takes a8, in fact, Viktor Korchnoi resigned. There's definitely a lesson here to try and castle soon, even in the English opening symmetrical variation, that there are some very punishing forcing moves available to open the position up. Okay, it was just an interesting game which caught my eye, and I think let's check out some more games from this tournament. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.